This podcast was recorded on the ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation.
This is Humans on Rights, a podcast advocating for the education of human rights. Here's your host, Stuart Murray.
July 1st in Canada is a day that we celebrate, whether it's a birthday or an anniversary. I think a lot of people from a lot of communities look at it as an anniversary because birthday is a date that you move forward. And frankly, there's been many, many people in this country before it became Canada. First Nations, Indigenous peoples have been here years and years before. Having said that, July 1st is a day that there's an anniversary, and a lot of Canadians like to say that we're very proud of this great country. But not everybody's born here. And one of the things that I want to talk to my guest today, Shane Henderson, about people that come from outside of Canada that are looking for a place to call home or to settle, or how does that work and what are some of the challenges involved in that? And that's why I'm thrilled and delighted to welcome to Humans on Rights my guest, Shane Henderson. Shane Henderson is the executive director of Manitoba Interfaith Immigration Council, Incorporated, but is commonly known as Welcome Place. Now, Shane has 25 years of experience in finance and operation roles, a lot of that in the not-for-profit sector. He's key in reestablishing organizational experiences, financial and administrative challenges. So lots of great experience. And I know on the personal side, in his notes, he talks a lot about being a mentor in sports and loving sports and how he uses some of the sports analogies in his workplace. So let's just start from the beginning. Shane Henderson, welcome to Humans on Rights.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Stuart.
So, Shane, just a little bit about you, your personal journey. Are you, is Manitoba home? How did you sort of find your life's journey being in this very important role of being the executive director of such an important place, Welcome Place?
Yeah, well, I was actually born in the East Coast, lived there till about 12. My dad worked for the CN, so they shut down the shops there, and we had a choice to move to either Montreal or Winnipeg. And seeing that my dad is very thrifty, Winnipeg was the place to come to, which is quite fitting for anyone who's actually been to Winnipeg and stuff like that. We're always looking for the deals and how to stretch the dollar and all that kind of stuff. So I still consider East Coast home, but really Manitoba, Winnipeg is my home.
Sure. Your roots are East Coast, but you're home. Did you do your schooling here, Shane, in Winnipeg?
Yeah, I started very young age in my early 20s, looking at going through at the time the CGA and CMA program, which is now amalgamated into the CA. Got pretty close to finishing off my degree. Then life happens when you start having kids at a very young age. I was, I got married very young and have 3 children, and kind of put that to the side and said, "Oh, I'll go back to that when my kids are older." That never happened. But I always had a strong, I love finance. I love money. I love finding ways to be creative. I started off my finance career doing a little bit of like working in the private sector and the public sector, but it was always like, what am I doing here? I'm just trying to sell a product and trying to make revenue. And then I kind of got my first taste of nonprofit world actually right next to where Human Rights Museum was built, the Manitoba Theatre for Young People. At the time when you guys were building the museum, and went into there, and they were having troubles making payroll and going through quite a financial thing, and so kind of went in and kind of helped them out, guide things, set up new processes, and get them out of debt and put them on a good footing for the future. And so I've always had that strong sense of what can I do in the nonprofit world to really put a stamp on things and really help people understand that nonprofit, they don't get a lot of money, and we're always fighting for contracts, or we're fighting for donations, and how do we best utilize that money and be the proper stewards of the money that people are giving us and trusting us, and how do we make best resources. So from there I worked about 5 years, and finance people typically tend to find new jobs after 5 years. It seems to be our ceiling. But I think I've been in here at Welcome Place for over 7 years. So I passed that hurdle. I've got over that thing, and I really love the humanitarian aspect that we do things, and like I said, like, what can we do with the money, and how can we serve, people with limited resources. And one of the things that we're quite proud of here with our team is that we used to get quite a bit of sizable grants and such, and we see typically about 4,000 clients every year. We're now seeing the same amount of clients with operating with 2.8 million less. So, that's really the show, how the nonprofit sector can really, find ways to reduce costs and be more efficient and operate and change, things. So those are the things that I'm very passionate about is how can I bring that knowledge and stuff to the rest of our sector?
For sure. And I think, Shane, just before we get into kind of your role as the executive director of Welcome Place, I think, you make a very, very good point about the financial side of the not-for-profits. I've had the opportunity many times to be involved in not-for-profits myself, sometimes, with the management side, working with a board of wonderful volunteers. But I sometimes think that business people, and this is a generalization, you disagree with me if you feel, please, but I've often thought that a lot of people who run successful businesses, when they come into a not-for-profit, for some reason, they have a slightly different view of how the organization works or what happens, or, when you introduce the word volunteers, it seems to change the focus. And you're trying to say to them, no, we're an organization. It may be not for profit, but all of the elements of running, your personal, your private business, all of those elements, do have a real holding place in a not-for-profit. It's a different name. So I don't know if you've had that same experience, but clearly you've had some great success at it.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that when I work with a not-for-profit, I like to think it's my own company. And how am I going to make this, like, when people think not-for-profit is, oh, you're doing this work and you're trying to break even. But a lot of non-for-profits are like running it as a not for loss. Right. And then that's really hard to understand, they need that strong financial background, someone in that's been able to sit there and look at projects and try different pilot projects and work the cost out. And for me, it's a return on investment. And our greatest return on investment is the success of our refugee clients.
Yeah. So how did you kind of find yourself walking through the door the first time to Welcome Place? And when you walked through that door, were you the executive director at that time, or did you have another job, or is that where you started?
They were hiring for a director of finance and operations, which is obviously, what I like to do. And humanitarian type things have always been one of the top of the things that's always on my mind. One of the things that I think Canadians don't really realize is, we're really lucky to be born and raised in Canada. And sorry, I get a little bit emotional here because it's
all good.
You see the people that come through and you read their stories and their journeys and how to get here. And it's like, man, like, we are so blessed. And, sometimes it's like, oh, I was stuck in traffic and it took me an extra 5 minutes. We just lose that connection. So, finding a place like this to where you can just really get grounded and see the change of people's lives and for the better. It really, to me, you can't pay me enough, right? Like, I could go somewhere and work the private sector and make 3 times as much, but I'm not doing that work because it's not fulfilling. So I found Welcome Place, and at the time I was as I said, the director of finance and operations, and we went through some challenges 5 years ago, and I got asked to clean things up and take on the role of executive director, and now I'm kind of doing both roles.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you obviously brought your skill set. I mean, at the time, Welcome Place, as you admitted, there were some challenges, lots of challenges in most organizations. You came in, you've taken what was a difficult situation, and now you're moving forward. And so, Shane, just maybe a couple of things just for listeners. We'll continue to talk about Welcome Place as Welcome Place. It's what it's known as. But it is, I think, officially, or maybe its proper name, if I could use that term, is Manitoba Interfaith Immigration Council, Inc. So that's how it was established some, I guess, 75 odd years ago, I think.
Yep.
So there is an interfaith organization behind what is called Welcome Place.
Correct. And it's not like we're an actual church or that type thing. Like the interfaith came. So in back history in 1945, after the Second World War, a bunch of different congregates got together and they wanted to help refugees and settle. So actually 79 years. So next year will be our 80th anniversary. So when we look back at the history and stuff, we've kept that interfaith as part of the thing. So our volunteer board, the seats are made up of multi-faith within the city. So, we have 2 seats allocated to the Catholic and 2 seats, whatever, right, going down the list of all different things. And that's a way to make sure that, because Winnipeg's a very diverse and very community city. So it's a good way to make sure that all different congregations are heard and part of the process of what we do.
And so let's get into that. As an executive director for Welcome Place, let's just talk a little bit about the mission of what Welcome Place is, and let's talk about how we can wrap that into some of the things that you're actually doing. So it's always great to lift words off of a page into action. So talk a little bit about the mission of Welcome Place, and then let's get into a discussion about some of the specific projects you're involved in.
So our purpose here is like we try to exist to foster dignity, like independence and compassion for all refugees that are arriving here in Manitoba. And one of our goals is to make, their lives easier, as a refugee when they settle. If anyone's ever moved to a different country or don't speak the language and stuff like that, how to navigate, it's very, very stressful. And a lot of our clients are coming here with already leaving very stressful and, sometimes being persecuted or tortured or whatnot. And, we want to try to make their settlement jersey as easy as possible. So, we try to, welcome them, establish, settlement plans and goals, and really with the goal of them becoming contributing members of our community across Manitoba.
Yeah. So Shane, let me just ask, because sometimes a lot of times there's a bit of a disconnect I find in conversations with some of my other guests about refugees, asylum seekers, immigration, migration. With respect to Welcome Place, is there an area that you're more focused on, like with respect to refugees?
Yeah. So like when people talk about like newcomers, immigrants, a lot of, people talk about like the Canada's levels is almost 500,000 every year. And, but when you break that down into economic refugees and family class, that's almost 80 to 85% of it. What we tend to focus on is the other 20%, which are the refugees and the protected persons, whether it be a resettled, government assisted refugee, a privately sponsored refugee, asylum seeker is what they're called, or even doing, a little bit of a blended visa type offered situation where, we're bringing people into our country and we're helping them out financially. And a lot of times these financial resources are only for their first year. And to me, that's great that we give them a little bit of footing, but to come to a new country, try to learn a new language, try to find employment, navigate our very complex systems and forms and all that kind of stuff, it's really daunting. And sometimes that first year is not enough. And sometimes the allocation, that they are getting help with or from family members is not enough. Right. And for me, for a person to truly get settled, I think it's really a 3 to 4 year program. And those are one of the things that, we wish that, there was funding and other things to help them out with that. But unfortunately, it's not.
So Shane, we talked a little bit just before we went on air here. And I know you say you don't like the term asylum seekers. Why is that? And what would you prefer that we use?
Well, and a lot of times because they're here to seek a claim. Right. And we refer to them as a refugee claimant. When you use the word seeker, it has that strong thing that it's negative and, they're just seeking to pull money and be supported. And it's like, it's the total opposite. They're here, they're fleeing like countries where they have shoot to kill orders and their journeys to get here is like, you can't imagine it. And just to get here and when they arrive, it's like, right away, they want to, I want to find a job. I want to learn English. I want to, do all these things. And when they get to those points, although there is hurdles because it takes times with our processes is, like they'll work 2 or 3 jobs. And a lot of times they'll do those jobs that most Canadians don't want to do. And they'll work and they'll send money back home and then they'll try to bring more family members over. And so it's like when you hear the word seeker, to me, it's, they're really all they're doing is just they're claiming refuge. right? Help me out. I can't return to my country. If I return, I'm going to be tortured or killed, or my family members are going to, so on. So it's a lot of times we just like to just refer them as refugee claimants.
Right. Thanks for the clarification. And I think, again, language in these conversations is super important. So appreciate the way that you view the world, because I think that's the most important thing right now. It's really difficult to say what's a standard or what's a typical day in the life of Shane Henderson. But just for example, how do you get sort of tapped on the shoulder as the executive director of Welcome Place and say, there's a family coming from, I'll just pick a country, Sudan. Just walk us through a little bit about what's the process, and how is it that, you at Welcome Place are designated for a specific family, say, as I'm using in this example, from Sudan?
So there's only a few different pathways that they can come as a refugee, right? And I mentioned earlier, like there's government-sponsored refugees. So these are ones where the government will be, paying the cost for the first year. They'll work with an agency like ours. We'll meet them at the airport. We'll bring them into our building. So our building is really nice because we have 3 floors of 30 apartments. We're able to house them for temporary accommodations and then give them a holistic approach to their settlement needs, and then find them permanent residents after that. The second pathway is through privately sponsored refugees. So this is where we'll partner with the government of Canada and what, within the community, community members, whether it be a church, co-sponsors, family members, or a group of 5, and we'll sign an agreement that we will financially take care of them for that first year and provide them all the settlement services that they need. And then obviously the third was the refugee claimants that are, trekking here by foot and coming across. So a lot of their journeys, really starts with, them being stuck, displaced. I think what are the 117 million people are displaced right now in the world, right? And when you look at those numbers, it's like, wow, like, and a lot of times they'll be stuck in refugee camps or hiding out in different countries, and they could be waiting many years. It's not like, oh, I've been accepted and I got to go through. It's a long process and it takes them a lot of time to arrive. But when they get here, like, they are motivated, and they're motivated to contribute, to be part of the community, to volunteer, to, do whatever they can and succeed. And we've seen those numbers. We see they're very highly educated. They fill in a lot of our, healthcare shortages, construction. Another great thing about Winnipeg, there's always lots of construction happening, so there's plentiful of jobs, right? And when you look at some of the numbers in Canada, like 1 in 5 Canadians of the working age are set to retire in the next 2 or 3 years. 21% of our working force. What are we going to do? Like, how are we going to fill that? Well, we've got to fill that by bringing in immigration levels, and so the journey for them to get here it's tough. When I look at our proudly sponsored, as like I said, we're a sponsorship agreement holder. We get 140 spots a year that where we can partner with people to bring to Canada. We do a lottery system and we open up for 1 week. We get 5,000 applicants
For 140 positions.
for 140 spots.
A family of 5 is not part of 140. That's 130, like minus 5 is 135.
Correct.
Okay, so then just on that 5,000 applications, Shane, fascinating. Are all those applicants, where would they come from?
So they're typically coming from some of our, Eritrea, Somalia, some of our top countries that are coming in. But what we try to do is our lottery system is built on looking at the global aspect of displaced people. And then whatever the highest percentages are of all those, we, let's say 30% are from Africa. Okay, well then we'll allocate 30% of those to Africa or East Asia or whatever it might be. So we try to do it so that it's fair and we're representing, many different communities.
I appreciate that. And then on the other side of it, on sort of on the receiving side, Shane, when you've got 140 spots and you're co-sponsoring, how many organizations come forward to try to co-sponsor those 140 spots?
That's those organizations. We'll get 5,000 applicants.
Those are people that saying, look, we want to bring those families to Manitoba, to Winnipeg. So those 5,000 applicants, do they have to be Manitobans and Winnipeggers, or?
Yeah, well, it's preferably because it's on the flip side. There's 2 things as a sponsorship agreement holder. We have to make sure that they're financially taken care of that first year, and then that they're also provided settlement services. So being our agency, we are a settlement service providing agency. So that's the easy part, but it's the financial capability that we need to. So, we prefer that they are within Manitoba so that, we can make sure that they're getting that wraparound service. But again, there are cases where they'll connect in Toronto and then they won't show up. And they'll have family and friends in Toronto and they'll stay there. So when that happens, we have to find an alternate sponsor to make sure that those needs are met and part of the agreement. So a lot of what we do is educating, the groups that are interested in doing this stuff. We put on seminars, let them know what their roles and responsibilities are. And then a lot of follow-ups and checkups, whether it's with the co-sponsors or the groups or just even with the individual to make sure that they are getting their needs met.
You talked about 3 different ways that refugees come into Canada and particularly find themselves at Welcome Place. Shane, is there one area that is growing more than the other? Government versus corporate versus, of course, those who are fleeing and just find themselves walking across the border. Is there one area that seems to be growing more than the other?
Yeah, for the past year and a half, I would say the refugee claimant area has almost doubled, if not tripled. When we talked about that area, back in 2017, 18, during the Trump administration, we saw high levels in Canada. And at that point, we were looking at maybe 55,000 to 60,000 in Canada. Last year, we hit almost 145,000. And this year, we're projecting Canada to hit 190,000. So it's a growing concern. The province of Manitoba is seeing upwards of 150 to 160 refugee claims a month.
A month.
Yeah.
Wow.
And some of the rulings is kind of, Canada's put rulings in place to, they used to be able to cross and seek claim right at the border, land border right now. Now there's a ruling that they can't do that for 2 weeks. So they're kind of just hiding in limbo when they cross, ending up in shelters or, already our shelters are already busting at the seams. So it's putting a lot of additional stress on that. So it's trying to, handle the volume. We have a great partnership with Legal Aid Manitoba, where we have a consultant that comes in and helps them out with their claims. We have volunteer lawyers that come and help assist with their claims. We have actually a lot of legal students from the University of Manitoba, the Faculty of Law, that come and donate or volunteer their time to help out. Because you can imagine, like, those claims, there's a deadline. It's like once they started, it's like 45 days and they've got to get their basis of claim in, and where have you been and what was your journey and how did you get here and your family members and what's your case? Why are you, seeking refuge? And it's a lot of work that's going to get done in a short amount of time. But, when that work is done, then they're able to access our healthcare, and then they're able to get a work permit and start, contributing to our communities. So, sometimes it could take up to 6 months and, sometimes longer.
There's a 45-day kind of window that they have to get this done. I mean, obviously, just the way that things work, it's not always possible to do within 45 days. Is it difficult to get an extension, or how does that work? And I guess I look at this from a strictly an administrative standpoint to a humane standpoint.
One of the things that's odd with Canada is that if you've already tried to seek refuge in another country, and then Canada sees that as you've already sought refuge in that country, then you're kind of already bypassed this one step. And then they moved you into what's called a pre-risk removal assessment, which is really much tougher, shorter deadline, like 14 days. And a lot of that, which is, to me, is not very humane, because it's like, sure, they might have made their journey here and they have no choice to come up through the South America and through Mexico and then end up in the US, but they end up in a detention center and they're trying to seek claim and then they get rejected. And what's their other choice? Go back home and face prosecution, or try to make your way to Canada. So a lot of those deadlines are very firm. We really rely on a lot of volunteers to make sure we don't miss any deadlines, because you're really playing with people's lives. So, and once we do go through that whole process and get all that stuff in, like, Canada has a very high success rate, of accepting the claims. There's lots of history and lots of, they're from this country and they're from this place. And it's like, yeah. So they just kind of go through the motions. But I think one of the biggest things is they have to go to court and they have to really fight for their lives just to stay in our great country. And I don't know if people have been to court or not, but I've been to traffic court and I'm scared. right? Talking to a judge, and I've been here in my life. Can you imagine going into where you don't speak the language and you're trying to win a case? So, luckily enough, some of the good changes that the province of Manitoba did is that they increased the tariffs for Legal Aid Manitoba to help out with those cases, so that these people are getting actual proper legal care, and then just not trying to fill out their applications themselves or getting a community member to do it who's, if a lot of these applications, I feel that it's asking a lot of the same repeated questions, and they're long. And I feel like they're like trying to find a way to, oh, you said this on this form, and why is it not the same on this form? And it's like a game. It's almost.
I mean, it's tough enough for people that understand the language. But when you don't understand the language, you want to be very careful how you answer something. Of course, understanding that they're looking for a mistake. So somebody, they've passed and they're successful in the 45-day window. Then do I understand it that they've got a year sort of under your watch and using kind of that term, that wraparound service through that 1 year to sort of allow them to find their footing if they can? Let's talk about the successes. So, the people that are able to do that, is that accurate to say that they've got kind of a year under the watch of Welcome Place to get established?
Well, it's like the 45 days is just to submit the application. So they actually get the hearing with Immigration Refugee Board. It could take anywhere from a year and a half to 2 years.
But they're in Canada. They're waiting for that.
They're in Canada. They're waiting for that. So they've got their face documents, and they're allowed to work, and they work permits and so forth. During that whole time, they're in our agency getting settlement support. A lot of them come with, a lot of psychosocial issues. So we'll make referrals to specialized agencies, whatever their needs might be that we can't do. There's lots of cross-cultural referrals, and they're always taken care of. And then once they become accepted, then they're able to move on and still stay with us and access funding from IRCC, which is Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada. And then they can still continue their journey until, what the ultimate goal really is for them to become a Canadian citizen. Right. So, once they become accepted and they become a permanent resident, they get a little bit more access to other resources and stuff. So typically they'll be with us for 5-7 years. Some of them will be with us forever. That might never really reach that goal, might have challenges and mental issues and will never be with that. But, we'll keep serving them.
And when you say be with us, you mean physically in Welcome Place, in the apartments that you have there?
Whether in the apartments or coming, our settlement offices. We have 2 floors of settlement offices where they're able to get support on, whatever their needs are to help out with their journeys and to get settled.
On the success side, is there a process to make a decision when you look at a family, they've been under your care for time and learning all sorts of things about the English language, about how our bus system works? I mean, all of the training of skills that you're bringing forward to welcome these people to becoming Canadians, hopefully as they go to a citizenship ceremony. Is there some way, Shane, or some people that say, look, you're ready to go, you're ready to make a mark, you've qualified for this, you've qualified for that. We're going to basically get you to go into the community and kind of start making a difference away from Welcome Place. Is there kind of a handoff there, from a happy celebration handoff, if I could use that term?
So when they first come with us, we try to build like a settlement plan. Like what are your goals? You arrived in Canada. What do you want to achieve? Do you want to go to school? You want to work? You want to bring your family here, start whatever it might be, and we build this long plan and we kind of do in stages. Okay, like this is our first goal and this is our, medium goals, and we work with them. And a lot of times, some people will come to our offices 3 or 4 times a week, once or twice a month. And then once they start getting more integrated and more comfortable, and we also teach them, how to do a lot of these forms, right? One of the biggest thing that we try to change is this sector was notorious for, oh, just come with me, come to my office, I'll fill out the form for you and I'll do it. Right. And that's kind of against the law, right? Like there's rulings and stuff like that. Like, we're not really teaching them how to do it. So we do a lot of, we have computer labs here and we teach them, computer skills, but we also teach them how to fill out their own forms, step by step and go through that. And to mention, like, one of the great things about our place is we're doing this in their official language, right? All of our workers, that are here have lived experience. They all speak their native language,
Really?
and we do that so that they're able to feel more at home in comfort and understand, because some of the things, well, I don't know what that word is, or I don't know how to say that word, and we'll translate it and interpret it and so forth. So, but when they get to a certain point, you start seeing them, they might come in like once a year, or they might not come in, for a couple of years, and we'll do check-ins on them and see how it's going. And, because, things change. And so we like to do, a health check and make sure everything's all right. And at some point, really, once they we're applying for citizenship, can you just help us out with that? And that to me it's like, okay, accomplished, done. And a lot of them are, I look back, our staff is like pretty much 90% of them are refugees. They've gone through that process. They've lived that experience. They know the journey. They know the struggles, and they come back and they either work here, they volunteer here, or, volunteer in their communities, and they give back. They're very, very generous.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that's worth repeating, Shane, because I think that a lot of times, as you say, and it's why, you take offense, and I agree with you on the word seeker. It's not about that. It's about trying to find a new way to establish the roots in a country so that they can grow their family and give back to the family or the country, and make a contribution. And I think that sometimes that's forgotten in this conversation. So I appreciate you sharing. Shane, I want to talk a little bit about, I went through one of your annual reports, and the amount of work that you do with your team there is extraordinary, the amount of things that you're involved in. But I wanted to sort of pick on a couple of pilot projects that I read, and I'd love you to give a little bit more background and detail on them. One of them was and I hope I get it right, the blended visa office referred, which is for newcomers. Can you talk a little bit about that pilot project and how it got started and why it's important?
There's always been an allocation from the federal government for that, and by allocation I mean, like, for Canada there's 250 spots, like, of people, and these are really specialized cases. These are ones that are really at risk. A lot of times it's women and children that are at extreme risk. They require a lot of attention. They require a lot of settlement needs. And they're really specialized cases. So this program is designed to where we partner with the government of Canada, and we bring certain individuals to our province, and we take care of them for 1 to 2 years. And it's designed where the government of Canada will pay for half of it, and a private donor will pay for the other half. So it's really a great way to blend, the government-assisted refugee and the private sector in a way to really help bring people that are really dire need to leave a place, and it's really like once we select a family, it's within a month or so that they get here, right? So, like, these are ones that are UNCHR are really deemed as really special cases. They really need to get out of their situation where they're at, and they need a safe place to live. And luckily, we've been able to find a local private donor that's been willing to pay for the other half of this cost. And it's really a great opportunity for us to really help those special cases, because there's not enough attention that's drawn to that. One of the other pilot projects you'll probably read about in our next AGM type thing is we're starting another partnership with a local donor out of Toronto that is looking at bringing women and girls that are sex traffickers out of Mexico, and bringing them to Winnipeg and to Nova Scotia. So we're looking at ways to partner with them to bring in close to 300 different families.
And those families, when they come to Winnipeg, they're really coming under the guidance or the welcome of Welcome Place. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we're just finalizing a job description. So obviously, Mexico and stuff like that, we're looking at someone Spanish speaking, but it'll be like, making sure that they get all their needs met, the coordination, making sure they're appropriately referred to the right agencies that they need to go to. We'll house them, we'll find them places to live, and just really provide them with all the settlement needs that they need.
And again, Shane, is this coming through Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada? Is that kind of under the global part of what they're doing?
Yeah, that's a humanitarian and compassionate type response.
Just going back for a sec, you mentioned UNCHR, acronym for
United Nations Commission Refugee Agency.
okay, good enough. No, sometimes you get into the acronym. No, listen, you know exactly what it is.
I tried.
I know you know.
Not to.
I know you know. Anyway, just it helps to sort of form it out. So I appreciate that. A couple of the other pilot projects, Shane, if you want to just to share a little bit about, because there are so many, but I thought what caught my eye was the settlement of rural Manitoba.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
So we saw a need when Ukrainians were starting to come in, and they were housed in the hotels by the airport. And they're coming in plane loads. I think over the 2 years, I think Manitoba welcomed over 40,000 Ukrainians.
Wow.
That's a high number. And a lot of them were in hotels, and they were coming to an end of, they want to work, they wanted to live in different communities. And we saw an opportunity to partner with a lot of our settlement agencies that are working in rural Manitoba. And, a lot of them will provide the same settlement support that agency like mine does. But you're in Winnipeg, you go to this place you want this done, you go to this place for mental health, you go to this place if you want to learn English, go to this place if you want to find work. But in rural Manitoba, it's one agency. And they do all that together in one spot. So we saw an opportunity to really help the Ukrainians find places to live in rural Manitoba, link them up to an agency that's out there that's able to provide them settlement services, link them up to other agencies. There's what's called a LIP, so local immigration partnership, that'll help them connect to the community and so forth. And there's lots of jobs in rural Manitoba. Rural Manitoba struggling, and then it's been struggling for many years. And they're finding that, the ways to survive, just like Canada's realizing, is through immigration.
Right. Interesting.
So we kind of did this pilot project, a little bit of funding, not a lot, but we kind of self-funded the majority of it, where we would take them we bring them and we do like, hey, here's 15 different communities, and we made these community profiles, and this is what this community has to offer. This community has a hospital, this community, they all have schools, and they have these types of jobs, and we kind of get their interest from that. We do a workshop group, and if they're interested, then we'll take them out to those communities. We'll do a site visit, and we'll go and look at the community and look at the settlement, bring them to the settlement agency. A lot of times, like our most recent one, we went up to Gimli. We took like 12 people. They all came back. They all had jobs.
Really?
Within that day, right?
Wow.
So it's okay. We want to move there. So we helped them. Okay, let's grab all your belongings. We'll help you move out and find your place to stay. And we've been able to do that with close to almost 300 people over a very short, like over a year. And we've helped settle into almost 14 different rural communities. And so now we've started to, see some really great progress on that. So now we've opened it up. Why is it just Ukrainians? Let's do it for all refugees.
For more, yeah. I mean, Ukrainian population in Manitoba is extremely welcoming, and it's extremely well known. And the contributions they've made to this province are incredible. So, nice to have that relationship, Shane, and nice to have the opportunity to. I mean, the story of going to Gimli and having jobs that day. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, what a great story.
It's like that in every community. And we get contacted on a regular basis from, people that are looking to hire people from rural communities. Can we come and do a talk and a seminar and talk about our work? Absolutely. Right. So when we looked at this project, a lot of times when we do settle people here in Winnipeg, they kind of get stuck in the North End. And it's not to say that the North End is bad by any means, stuff like that, but it's the, there's so many temptations to, here's your little bit of money. Oh, wait, you got to use your food allowance to also pay for your rent. How are you going to survive? And sometimes, I find in certain areas, we don't have that strong community feel. And so what we thought is, okay, well, we all know how, I grew up in a small town in New Brunswick, and I knew what rural life was and the community aspect of that. Why don't we try to give them, 2 or 3 years to settle in rural Manitoba, get their footings, and then, if they choose to come back to Winnipeg, then they can choose different areas that they want to, live and work in, right? Instead of just saying, well, you can only afford to live in, this apartment, and that's full of cockroaches and rodents and everything else, and see ya.
Yeah, exactly. It's your new home. Welcome to it.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to just explore with you is that you talk a lot about you love working with children and families, and particularly in and around sport, whether that be baseball, fast pitch basketball, I think junior high school, all of those areas. And when I read about a bit of your background, is you love to use that mentorship, that coaching, to bring it to the workplace or what you're doing. Explain how you've been able to do that. Like, give us some examples of how that's made a difference from your perspective to people working at Welcome Place or families, refugees that have come to Welcome Place.
Yeah. So at a very young age, I had some really great coaches to the point where I didn't have a lot of family support, but my coaches would sign me up for sports. They would take me to all my games and practices and really instilled that leadership role and comfort and sense of belonging, that a lot of people get from sports. And those are things that I'm super passionate about is how do we educate people that are younger and the youth and so forth, and how do we become a mentor, right? How do we give back to what we were really passionate about? And that was one of the things I was always taught is like, you're playing this sport, but there's three things that you need to gain from it. One is like, okay, you're going to get physical activity, right? You're going to learn great skills in life and all that stuff. But the third and most important is what can you do to get back to that sport? So, and that's whether you become a volunteer coach or a mentor. And, like my kids started growing up and, I'd be coaching them at a very high level and stuff like that. But it's like, but I'm a parent, right? Like I shouldn't be doing that. Like, how about you find me some alumni that have gone through this that are, in their 20s and 30s and have them coach and I can just mentor. Right. So I've always had that, I grew up being mentored by coaches and, and being like, captains and all that kind of stuff. So I tried to bring that into our agency to where, like I said, like 85% of our, staff are refugees and they've had that lived experience, but they don't always have that strong mentorship background on finances and operations and so forth. So a lot of what I bring back is, I'll be mentoring our managers or our assistant directors and stuff like that, and teaching them, the inner workings and how to do budgets and how to, make things, stretch the dollar as far as you can and how to plan for things and how to look for the future. Like, my job as executive director is I'm very hands off on operations. I trust my managers to do their job and that I'm always looking 5, 6, 7 years ahead. So it's how do I get them to be part of that thing and have that same vision, right? We can't be always reactive. We have to, let's try to be proactive and find ways, this country is having this kind of conflict. Okay, well, and at some point we know that we're going to need this language at some level because they're going to be coming, Afghanistan happened, right? All of a sudden we got 40,000 Afghans. Well, do we have anybody that speaks, Dari or whatever the other language is? And it's like, nope. So, you've got to always, find ways to mentor and educate people and really share the things that you've learned. So I found ways to do that through sports. And now I have that same thing to do at work. Right. So for me, it's like, whew, I go to work, I mentor, I teach, I help, inspire people. And then in the evenings, I do the same thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I just want to ask you one last thing before we hit the off ramp here. If there's one thing that somebody is listening to this Humans on Rights podcast and they hear this name, Shane Henderson, and he's the executive director of Welcome Place, is there one thing that you would want people to be left with, a takeaway from this podcast that perhaps I haven't asked you about?
I think it boils down to volunteering. I talked about myself being a volunteer and the benefits of that, but volunteering in your community, volunteer for agencies like ours, volunteer for, homeless people, whatever it might be, whatever piques your interest. Just what's a couple hours of your time? Get away from the TV, get away from the electronics, go help somebody. So, we really saw after the pandemic, like we lost a lot of volunteers and it's been hard and a struggle to rebuild that. But a lot of nonprofits rely on volunteer people to come in and help them, with their workload and the satisfaction you get with helping a nonprofit. So if anybody listens to this, get out and volunteer.
Where can somebody get information if they want to volunteer at Welcome Place?
You can go to our website of www.miic.ca, so our legal name, Manitoba Interfaith Immigration Council, and there's a volunteer form there. So you can volunteer for certain activities. We have great volunteers that come in and just run conversational circles, English computer classes. We started a new program like gardening, cooking classes. Cooking classes is a big one for especially single men, because we're seeing lots of refugee claimants that are coming through that are single men and don't know how to cook or use a stove. So there's lots of opportunity even to come down and help them with their claims. A lot of our staff, we volunteer in our evenings and we help out with those high volumes of claims and help them write their narratives. It's really rewarding, and you leave and it's like, man, like I said this earlier, we are so lucky to be in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, listen, I want to thank you for your time. And I'll just say this, for somebody who has admittedly say they love numbers, I think you admittedly love people. And thank goodness you do, because you're in a great position to share that. So, Shane, thank you for spending some time with me on this Humans on Right podcast. I really appreciate your time.
That's great. Thank you for having me, Stuart.
Thanks for listening to Humans on Rights. A transcript of this episode is available by clicking the link in the show notes of this episode. Humans on Rights is recorded and hosted by Stuart Murray. Social media marketing by Buffy Davey. Music by Doug Edmond. For more, go to humanrightshub.ca.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.